Really excited to share the latest and greatest functionality from Microsoft, which is looking to help organisations leverage technology to improve sustainability. So we've got a couple of slides to run through before I hand over to Martin to run through some of that capability. Martin, if you just go to the next slide, please. So just before we get to the main event, I thought it would be good to test if everyone's awake this morning. That would be fun to kick off with a little bit of a quiz. So either if you're comfortable to come off mute or just pop it in the chat. Couple of questions here. So the first one is, according to the Times Higher Education Climate Impact Forum, there were 1,050 universities which have pledged to reach net zero emissions, but by which year do we think that goal is set for? Anyone pop them in the chat if you know, any guesses? Give everyone a minute if they want to do that. Next question we've got on there is, what percentage of university leaders have reported that the Sustainable Development Goals inform how their institution operates? So I've seen, thanks Michelle for popping in a answer. We'll give you all the answers at the end. See a couple of people type in. Emily. And then just the final one, we were saying before, you can't really do a talk on sustainability without throwing Greta Thunberg in there. But does anyone know what song she sang? She did a bit of karaoke at a climate change concert. And I think it was a song that someone was saying she might have sung it with a boyfriend. So does anyone know what song she sang? Bit of a rogue one, to be fair. Okay, I've seen a couple of ones coming in. So Martin, if you don't mind just clicking through, we'll just get the answers popping up. Okay. Yeah, so it's 2050 that the Times Higher Education Climate Impact Forum to get to net zero. I think that's kind of the one across the board that a lot of people are signing up to. 2030, Michelle, would be great, but you never know, we might get there. Then I know there's some correct answers for this one. Percentage of university leaders around the SDGs, 80% is correct. And then finally, the Greta Thunberg one was Rick Astley is never going to give you up. I think she might have done a little bit of a remix on that one too. So just a bit of fun to kick off. So Martin, if you go on to the next slide, please. So I think there might be some familiar faces, but for anyone new on this call, our Higher Education Hub essentially is a community that was created to bring together peers in the higher education sector for across, business leaders to start discussions around relevant themes and doing some demos of that technology. And the goal really is just to break down those business challenges and the opportunities and how that feeds into the technology that can support you with them. So if you just go on to the next slide. So just a bit about Crimson. So and the next one, please, Martin.
Doesn't seem to work. There we go.
There we go. So Crimson are a Microsoft Gold partner. We help across several sectors, of which higher education is one. And we just really look to see how you can realise the opportunities through Microsoft technology. We have technology practices across Azure, Dynamics 365, Modern Workplace, SharePoint, Power Apps, as well as data and Power BI consultancy. And really what we look to do is how can we bring our knowledge of the Microsoft technology, but also from our customers within higher education that we partner with, and bring that knowledge into what we essentially call solution accelerators that build on the Microsoft stack. And really just allow us to engage at pace with you guys and build that capability for a standing start rather than starting from scratch. So that's just a little bit about us and about Crimson. If you go on to the next slide, just a final one around what we are known for. So I mentioned a little bit just then, our experience with technology with other customers across the sectors help us deliver intelligent customer experiences for your students and your staff through omni-channel engagement, for example, optimize business processes, and also how can you use those data insights to really report on them and create actions off the back of them. To bridge those gaps between the business problems, the technology, and the outcomes that you are looking to achieve. So one last slide before I hand over to Martin. So as I've said, you've got myself and Martin, the host for today's session. I'll hand over to him in a minute to look through that Microsoft technology and that capability. Some of you guys might have heard about it a little bit. So Microsoft hosted their Envision event earlier this year, and they showcased essentially the latest and greatest technology at that event. And a key topic of that, as I think a lot of events at the moment, was around climate change and those global sustainability development goals. So the stuff that we'll be showing you today will be relevant across various organisations, but it is new technology from Microsoft that we are really excited to talk to you today. If you've got any questions throughout, please, if you're happy to come off mute, put your hand up and we'll get you on. If you'd rather just write a message in the chat, we can call them out as we go through. But on that note, I'll pass over to Martin.
Okay, so thanks, Madeline. Good morning, everybody. I've just got a few slides that I want to go through just to kind of give you an indication of where Microsoft are currently in terms of their sustainability journey, in terms of the technology that they are working on to help organizations help calculate their carbon emissions and all other things related to sustainability. So, and then once we've done that, then I've got a short demo just to show you some of the key features of the solution as it stands. So where is your organization on its sustainability journey? So if you look at a lot of the documentation that's available online, you'll see they talk about, what you are expected to understand in terms of, the requirements with sustainability. And what they do is they typically talk about 5 pillars as part of that journey. Now, what Microsoft have actually done is they've simplified this message for us, and what they've done is they've reduced those 5 pillars down to 3, and those are assess, accelerate, and transform. And I've got a slide on each of these so that we can be absolutely clear about what we are expected to understand from this model. The key point is that we really need to know where we are today as an organization, and we need to be able to calculate in a collective manner and a formulated standard manner so that we can then start to work out where we want to get to in terms of our carbon emissions. So let's have a look at assess. So I don't think anybody would disagree that, one of the biggest challenges that all organizations face today is how are they going to reduce their carbon emissions? And while, we've got the governments and businesses across the globe sort of, racing ahead with ambitious targets, it's organizations like our universities and other organizations that Crimson work with that are kind of really left to work out how they're going to deliver on these targets. And obviously what we're aiming for is net zero. We need a common foundation, really, so that we can understand how we're going to achieve this. And one of the things that the sustainability model has done is it's placed our carbon emissions into 3 scopes, and they're commonly known as scope 1, 2, and 3. So not particularly adventurous there with the naming. But what it allows us to do is hopefully measure carbon emissions in an accurate, a consistent, and a reliable way. And we'll pick up on those 3 scopes in a little bit more detail later on. The key thing here, though, is that we need to be able to capture and record a lot of data, typically known as activity data. And there's lots of ways that we can do that. So, there's lots of technology out there that will help us, like telemetry, sensors, geospatial imagery, and emission sources that we can use to measure and monitor the impact across our organization. What we can then do is we can then analyze and visualize and report on that usage, your environmental impact, and your sustainability progress. And obviously, we'd be looking to report that back to, our stakeholders. So, as a university, our actual stakeholders, but also things like regulators. And also, we're answerable to the public when it comes to sustainability as well. So we'd need to be able to report to them. So when we look at the assess pillar of this sustainability model, what we're actually looking at is three elements. So we're looking at the accuracy within the HE sector, and that can be quite difficult. So because universities are involved in so many different activities, um, and so being able to kind of assess and accurately measure that can be quite a challenge. So, for example, you've got things like students that are living in their own houses. Not all students will go into university accommodation. Some will live in their own accommodation, or they'll go into private accommodation, and they'll be consuming electricity. They'll be potentially burning fossil fuels. So therefore, you don't have a huge amount of control over recording that information. So it can be a challenge. But we do have other ways of assessing this. So we may not know the actual activity data, but what we might be able to do is to be able to get some summary data that we can use to add into the model and help contribute to our overall assessment. The EPC rating is a good indicator, and will realistically show us how much carbon is being emitted through our activities as a university. So, and that can contribute to the calculations. Now, it's not a perfect indicator because it is just an indicator, and as you know, we are trying to aim for accuracy, but we can use some of this information in conjunction with our own activity information from our own available assets. So, university buildings, the fleet vehicles that you might be using on your campuses. So you've got all that information, and you can bring all this information together and hopefully get an understanding of where you stand in terms of assessing your carbon emissions. Also, bear in mind, technology is going to play a big part here as well. So, we talk about things like IoT, the Internet of Things, and when everything is kind of connected. So, when we've got, heating systems, aircon systems that are all connected to a central computer system, and lots of organizations are already working on this, then we can be pulling that activity data in and actually using that in the Microsoft Cloud for Sustainability solution to help us resolve this. The other thing that we need to consider is privacy here. So, and I don't really want to get into this discussion today on this particular call, but we need to be aware that there may be privacy elements regarding the information that we're going to record. In terms of the technology, well, you do have the likes of Microsoft and Crimson and a lot of their other partners who are actually working on solutions for um, helping organizations to be able to move in the right direction when it comes to recording their carbon emissions. Okay, so Microsoft are firmly sitting in the assess area at the moment. But the next area is accelerate. So once we know where we are in terms of assessing where we stand right now, the next step is where do we actually want to get to? And to be able to tackle that delta between the carbon emissions that we're producing now and how far we are away from net zero or whatever other target you set yourself as an organization, it's typically broken down into four different areas. So the first thing we've got is our operational efficiencies. So this is where we can start to be a bit more smart with the technology that we are using within maybe the university buildings, how you're delivering classes, or technology that you're using to for your maybe your campus fleet vehicles. So basically this is all about maybe technology that you can leverage to track, but also to encourage you to maybe deliver your services in a smarter and more efficient way, um, so that you can achieve more operational efficiencies. The next thing is the ecosystem. So this is around assessing um, the impact of weather and how it's going to impact on the environment. So, this might be simple things like planting more trees or having more green spaces within your campuses, but also is being aware of the impact that the weather is having. And obviously that's particularly relevant at the moment with the past few days that we've just experienced. The next one is carbon. So here we talk about adopting smart energy. So, and there are incentives out there, and there are ways in which universities can start rolling out things like retrofitting of the campus buildings. So, many of the older universities will have, historical buildings, and it's how can we retrofit some of those buildings that we can still be um, thinking about the impact we're having on the environment and on our carbon emissions, but also making sure we stay true to the history of the university. But things like solar panels and other sources of green energy. And the one thing that we can't forget is waste. So obviously looking at things that we can consider here in how we can improve our waste and how we deal with the waste that the universities produce. So Microsoft and the partner ecosystem are working on technologies to aid us to enable the acceleration um, to getting organizations to net zero. And that's really good that Microsoft and lots of other technology companies are investing in that. And then the next slide, and this is the third pillar, is transform. So once we know where we are, we've assessed where we are right now. We've looked at accelerate. So we've looked at the technologies that we can um, implement or introduce into our organizations to help us get to where we want to be. Then the next thing we need to do is we need to then transform. And so this is all about how we can use that technology to help us achieve our goals. So it's things like, replacing high footprint resources. So, are there things that we can do in terms of um, our buildings again, the campus buildings, how we deliver our services to the students? Yeah. Things like using technologies that are sustainable by design and potentially removing our footprint. Um, Looking at new ways of operating our business, so new business models, and various sort of techniques like that as well. So those are the three pillars. As I said right at the start, what Microsoft have done is they've simplified these pillars because if we look at the global documentation on this, they talk about 5 pillars. And as I said, what Microsoft have done is condensed it down into 3. So in one of the earlier slides, I talked about emission scope and the 3 scopes. So Oh, sorry. I just wanted to jot back to assess again. Sorry. This is kind of the reason why I wanted to put assess in here again is to just say this is firmly where we are right now. So in terms of where we are with the Microsoft technology. So we're very much firmly in the assess area. So sorry, let me go back onto this scope. Um, so the issue that we have with scope is that it can be represented in different ways and is very much open to interpretation. Um, so for the purpose of this demo, what I'm going to do is take this line. So use this as our definition of scope. And you can see on this diagram up here, right at the very top, we've got our cloud with all our, different elements, our carbon and nitrogen and all those sorts of things. They're kind of all floating around up there, and those are all the bad things that organizations we are producing. Um, the trouble is, how do we produce these? So, well, there's different things that we do as an organization that will contribute to those emissions. And as I said, they typically fall into three scopes. Scope one is probably the easiest because that's your direct emissions. So those are the things that you can control directly. So that could be things like your own university buildings, how you're heating them, how you're cooling them, how you're lighting them. Those are in your direct control. Um, Also things like using different ways of delivering services to your students. So during the pandemic, universities had to do a lot more with doing remote learning. Um, and I know that in a lot of situations it's not ideal, but the one thing it did demonstrate is that using technologies like that uh, did reduce carbon emissions. So because students weren't traveling, universities weren't having to heat and light the buildings as much as they typically would have done in the past. And also, we've got company vehicles in here. So lots of universities will have, maintenance vehicles. If they've got a campus that is maybe spread across a city, they may have vehicles that they use to deliver different things to the different parts of the campus. So again, that's all in your control. S- Um, Scope 2 and Scope 3 talk about indirect um, uh, elements that are going to cause emissions. And they split into the Scope 2 is the indirect purchases. So that would be things like the university purchasing the electricity or purchasing, other forms of energy that they use for heating and so on. But um, they're indirect because obviously we use a third party um, and we purchase from those. And it's how are they producing that energy? So how good are they in terms of their emissions and monitoring their emissions and controlling them? And then scope 3, basically, that is everything else. So that's all other forms of indirect emissions. So these are the ones that are not in your control. And this could be things like university buying equipment for a science lab or an IT lab, for example. Again, that's indirect because we don't know what those organizations are doing in the production of the lab equipment or the IT equipment. Um, so things like commuting, so students commuting to the university staff themselves commuting to the university. So these are all things that are out of the university's direct control and will fall into scope 3. The final point on these scopes is that these definitions, they can be contentious and they are open to interpretation. So for example, and I've got a couple of examples here just to see whether anybody's got any views on these. So a university, for example, owns an off-campus residence. So instead of the campus halls of residence, they own some buildings that are off campus, and the students can live in those buildings. But the students themselves control the gas and electricity consumption. Is that scope 1, 2, or 3? Because it could be open to interpretation, and it could fall into any of those. Another example that we've got is the university sends a team on a conference, but the attendees arrange their own travel. Again, scope 1 or scope 3. So, the university is arranging for them to go on this conference, but the attendees are booking their own travel. So again, there is some contention here in how we interpret these scopes. And then just specifically around the technology. So Microsoft Cloud for Sustainability is a new app. It was released, it is really hot off the press. It was released in June 2022. So it's clear, it's important to understand that it's not a mature application at this point in time. So what I'm about to demo to you, um, you know, is still changing. So every time we look at it, we see something different when we actually look at the technology. However, Microsoft will continue to invest in this solution. They've made a commitment to really build out this solution over the coming months and years. Um, will it solve all our calculations? Probably not, but it will be a massive asset when it comes to recording and calculating the majority. So it's certainly important in that respect. What it does do is that it allows us to have accurate, comprehensive, and increasingly real-time view into the environmental footprint across all emission sources. And that real-time element is quite important, because as we're becoming more connected in our day-to-day lives, more and more of our um, appliances and technology that we use on a day-to-day basis is becoming connected. So, things like your fridge freezer at home can now be connected using Internet of Things. Even your kettle, we've been used to smart TVs now for a number of years. So again, all connected to the internet. It provides users visibility into the total emissions footprint across their operations by centralizing the data in a common format to measure, reduce, and report out on their emissions. Now, that's a statement from Microsoft, and they've basically said this is what the solution is intended to do. So organizations will capture this information in lots of different ways, and that sometimes makes it hard for us to report on. What the Microsoft Cloud for Sustainability does is it allows us to bring all that data together in a common format, and then allow us to be able to report on that. And that's kind of reporting that previously has been quite hard to achieve, but is obviously getting better now. The other thing that it allows us to do is to have industry aligned sustainability targets, and these provide us with actionable insights and a reduction strategy. So this is the output from using a solution like this. So we've got this data, we've got it standardized, we're able to report on it, and what that can do is give us a lot of insight and the ability to put together strategies for how we reduce our emissions. So I think on that note, we can look at a demo. But before I do that, does anybody have any questions?
Don't think
Okay,
there are any in the chat at the moment. We'll keep an eye on it though, Martin.
okay, cool. So what I'm going to do is just close the slides down for a minute and drop into this is the Microsoft Cloud for sustainability. It gets harder to say that word the more you say it. So So this is this up here, and this is a trial of the solution. Just to give you the heads up, I'm using sample data here. So if you see some data that looks a bit strange, it's because I've imported the sample data in here, and also a lot of it will be American. So so don't be concerned about that, because obviously when you set it up for yourself, then you would set it up with your regional settings. Now, for those of you that are familiar with the Microsoft Power Platform and Microsoft Dynamics 365, hopefully this screen is not going to look uh, too daunting for you, because the first thing to point out, and this is not unexpected, the Microsoft Cloud for Sustainability is built on the Power Platform, um, and it does use Microsoft Dataverse for its data storage. Um, so it's great that they've done that, because that brings consistency with all your other Power Platform and Dynamics applications. But also, if you've already got those applications, then things like user adoption, usability are all much easier, because your users will be used to using these sorts of tools. So the first thing to call out here is the navigation bar. So if you are used to using a Dynamics app, what you'll notice is here that the navigation bar, which sits down the left-hand side of the screen, will be very familiar to you. So we've got our sections of the solution down here. So analytics, data, settings, help and feedback. Yeah, and then within each section, what you'll then have is your menu options, which may be grouped together under headings. So got a group here called analytics, and then underneath that we've got the individual items. And you can see here I'm currently sitting on the home screen, and it's got a little bit of a help and a bit of a dashboard sitting down here. But we'll look at the dashboards and analytics in more detail in a little while. Now, when you first set up sustainability or Microsoft Cloud for Sustainability, the first thing you will need to do is you'll need to set up some organizational level settings. So what I'm going to do is just change my section to settings. And the first thing that you will notice here is that the menu structure changes, and I've got organization settings. And the first thing that I want to point out to you is your company profile. So this is your company profile. So this is where you would set up your company profile. Now, what all I've done here is just edited some of the sample data that you can that we've got in the system. But you can see here I've created Crimson University, put in the address. Key things to point out here. Obviously, this is just address details, but the key things to point out here is your annual reporting period. So what this solution actually does is it reports on an annual basis. So we haven't started putting the 2022 data in, or we haven't put much of it in at the moment. But you can see here, this is just where you start your start month and your start day. So we've just left it to the defaults of January the 1st. But you can specify how you want your reporting cycle to actually work. The second thing to point out down here is the industries. So we use this demo environment for a number of different demos. So hence we've got things like food and beverage, and we've got manufacture of food products here. But the ones I wanted to point out to you was these ones here. So you can see there's a couple of industries in here that might be relevant to university. So the obvious one being education, but I also added in scientific research and development as well, because obviously lots of universities do have a research arm to their organization. So there's an add button up here. So if you wanted to add more industries in, then you can add them in to your organizational structure within sustainability. Why is that important? Because what that will do is that will add in specific industry type calculations to the model. So Microsoft are working with industry specialists to build out a calculation model for specific industries. So, and obviously that number of industries is going to increase over time as Microsoft expand the use of Microsoft Cloud for sustainability. The other thing I wanted to point out to you was that we do have a structure here. So, so this is the structure here, and if I that should expand and show me some more options. Okay, it doesn't want to do that, but you can see I've got Crimson University here. But what we could do is we could obviously have subdivisions of the university here. So whether that is different parts of the campus, maybe campus is split up, or it could be different departments, different divisions within the university. So we can build out our structure. The other thing we can put in is our facilities. So this is just showing you obviously the sample data here. I haven't modified this, but this then would be things like, you know, maybe the buildings that you've got that make up the university, and obviously you get this map view as well, so you can see where they are located. So you can add your facilities and your structure to your company profile. The next thing that I wanted to point out to you in the settings area is the greenhouse gases. So if I go to the greenhouse gases, what you can actually see in here is that this is it's trying to track and record right down to the specific carbon elements, or the HFCSs. So the hydrofluid carbons. I've become a bit of a scientist over the past few weeks as I've been kind of reading up about this. There's 68 in there as default, but you can add in more as you want. So we can see we've got CO2 here. If I click on that, then you can see this is where it's defined as a greenhouse gas. CO2 got description, the GHG category, and then it's global warming potential factor, which is 1. So you've got that for all of your greenhouse gases in here. And the other thing I wanted to point out to you was your unit groups. So this is where you can set up your unit groups. So these are the units that you use to measure your different energy elements, lighting, lengths, volumes, and so on. Now we've just left these as the default. But if I go into energy, for example, which is in default is in kilowatts, megawatts. But if I look down here, you can see I've got conversion factors as well. So those are all in the system as default. The one thing I'm not going to go into, but just to point out to you, is you do have this region mapping as well. So this is where you can map different regions. So if as a university you have departments that are abroad in different countries, then you can set those up in here too. So that's where you would do all your setup. So the next thing that I wanted to do was look at the activity data. So what I'm going to do is go to the data area, and you can see we've got activity data here. And the first thing you'll notice is that the activity data is split into the 3 scopes. So you've got your scope 1, which is your direct emissions, and then your scope 2, which is your indirect emissions. But then scope 3 is split into upstream and downstream. So these are your kind of the value chain ones, and these are the ones that are either upstream or downstream. So it has the ability to be able to ingest data from a variety of sources. Yeah. And you can see in here, you've got all these different sources that are predefined. And what we can do is we can look at each one of these. So, for example, if I look at scope 1, if I look at mobile combustion, which would obviously be around things like vehicle emissions, those sorts of things. So if I go into view, then these are the activities. So what I can actually see in here is that I've got these activities. And if I look at this one here, for example, so London Fleet, so this is our London campus for our university, then what I can see in here is that I've got a description which just says demo data, but then I've got the vehicle type and the distance in kilometers and the fuel type, yeah, and the fuel quantity then at the end here. So this is the activity data. Now, this data is ingested from sources, and if it's connected, then it can pull those in automatically. But we can manually import data as well, and I can show you an example of that in a little while. So that's how you would get your activity data in, and your activity data is obviously key to the calculations that are going to take place. So that rather neatly moves me on to the calculation models. So obviously got my activity data in. So how am I going to calculate my emissions? So what we've got is we've got calculation models in here. And again, because we're talking about, let's talk about the vehicles again. So the university fleet vehicles, what we've got here is we've got mobile combustion. So bearing in mind, a lot of this will come with as standard with the product. So just bear in mind that you will have a lot of these in. The first thing that I want to point out to you is that this is one of the default calculation models. So I can't edit this one. But what I can do is make a copy of it if I need to edit it. But what this is basically just showing me is, one, what is the source? What am I actually reporting on? And over here in the panel, you can see that it's filled in, or if I was doing this, I would fill in the details here. And then the emissions based on, is the vehicle on the road? So so basically this is just a choice here, and then I can see the calculation function over here. And then if it is on the road, then you can see that we're reporting slightly differently to if it's not on the road. So these are your calculation models. As I said, a lot of these will come from the product as default, but also bear in mind that the governments of the individual countries are also creating hubs online, and those will give you these mobile or these calculation models as well. So if the standard ones in the system are not applicable, then you can go to the hubs online for the specific government and get this information and ingest it into the system. Just to show you that, I've got one open here. So this is a US one, but this is basically the greenhouse gases emission factors hub for the US. Yeah, and obviously the UK has a similar one. There's a reason why I'm showing you the US one, but you'll see that in a minute. Now, as part of the calculation models, we use what's called factor libraries, emission factors. So over here, I've got factor libraries. So if I go into here, so what this is basically is a list of libraries that will hold my emission factors. So again, if I go to this one here, which is mobile combustion for fuel, what you can see then is when I go in here, this has now got the name of it, it's got the description, and this here is a document reference. And this is the reference to that emissions factor hub, that GHG emissions factor hub. So that's got the link in it there that takes me to that particular hub. So I can see the source of this emission factor library. Within the library, what you will then have is all your emission factors. So you can see in here we've got all the different emission factors for this library, and one of them here is diesel fuel. So if I click onto diesel fuel, then again in here we've got information about this, But the important bit in here is this section on the right, because this gives me the volume of emission that is produced and in what unit. So, and it's these values that are then used in the calculation models that you saw earlier. Are there any questions on any of that? Okay, good. Now, the other thing that I wanted to show you in this demo was we don't always have the actual data. We don't actually always have direct access to the data. So how can we allow the Microsoft solution to ingest data from different sources? So so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go back to my activity data here. And what I'm going to do is look at this one here. So purchased electricity. So this is one of the scope 2, the indirect emissions. So so what we could do is if we were purchasing electricity from a supplier, then what we could potentially do is create a connection to their system so that we could ingest our data, our consumption data directly from their solution. If it was a scope 3 example, then we might have an Excel spreadsheet. We may be supplied with an Excel spreadsheet. But the key point here is that we can ingest that data directly into the Microsoft solution. And what Microsoft have done is they have given us a number of ways of doing this. So if I look at the purchased electricity here and go to the manage connections, and then go to my connect to data. So what we've got here is we've got different options here where we can actually select our data from. So we've got activity data, so we can ingest activity data. We can ingest pre-calculated emissions. So this might be for the scope 2 where we don't have access to the actual activity data, but what we have got is pre-calculated emissions. So this could be scope 2 or scope 3, or it could be that we want to import reference data as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose activity data, and I'm going to choose purchased electricity from here. And then if I select next, then what you'll see is that it gives me all my different connectors. So it can be things like Excel, it can be a CSV file, OData, XML, and you've got various other sources here as well. But because this is a demo, Microsoft have very kindly given us a demo connection already. So I'm just going to use the AData Utility Manager there, and I'm going to select next. And then what it actually does is it then gives me this reference to the server. Obviously, this connection was already set up, but you'd obviously have to have this information provided to you by your supplier, and then any credentials that you're going to use to be able to access this data. So, and then what I would then do is select next. And this is where I can now do a scheduled import. So you can see at the moment, the scheduled import and the replace previously imported data are both turned off. But if I turn the import data automatically, then this is where I can now schedule it. And I can either schedule it based on a frequency, or I can schedule it based on a schedule. So I can say, daily, weekly at a specific time, or I can do frequency. So refresh every 1 days, starting at this time and starting at that time. So you've got this ability to set this up. And then what you would then do is you would just select next. And the last step is then that you give this a name. So I'm just going to call my demo test name. and then connect. And what it's then going to do is it's actually going to then create me that connection. And then what it will do is it will then start pulling in the data for me, either based on my schedule or my frequency. So getting data in from different sources, as long as you know the data that you want, all the templates are all standardized. So that's an agreement across the industries that we would standardize all the templates. So that would then start pulling in the data. And there you can see there's my connection there. So at any time I can go and check on the status of that connection. Okay, so through the course of the demo, then what we've looked at is we've looked at how we set up our organization. We've looked at how we get the activity data, and now how we ingest data. So I just want to finish off with the analytics area. So if I go to the analytics area, which is the screen where we started with all of this, what you can see is I've got an insights tab here, and I've got a scorecards tab. Now I've already opened these up because this is a trial and a demo. The dashboards do take a little while to load. So what I've done is I've kind of done a Blue Peter moment and opened them up already. So this is the insights. So this is the kind of insights that you would get. And when you go in here, what you'll see is that you've got your emissions overview, and then you've got your scope 1, 2, and 3, your renewable energy, and then you've got your deep analysis as well. So these are the reports that are produced based on your emissions. These are Power BI dashboards, but they're edited, they're embedded into the solution. So that's what the overview one looks like. I've just loaded up the scope 1 here. So because we're using sample data, it doesn't actually look that different, but you can see that's the scope 1 there. The other thing that I did was I loaded up the scorecards for you as well. So if I go to the scorecards, so what the scorecards do is they allow you to start to formulate your plan for basically transforming your business. So if I've got one set up here already, and you can see it's a carbon reduction plan for 2030. It's got 8 goals in it. So if I go into this one, then what you can actually see is you've got the 8 goals listed here. And then if I look at let's look at the reduced business travel distance by 20%. And then what this will do is this will give me insight into whether we're on target, whether we're behind, or so we've got that first of all represented in a chart, but then down here I've got the individual activity items. So you can see this is the history of the travel within the organization, and it's showing whether we're on track or whether we're at risk here as well. So I'm going to stop the demo at that point and ask if we've got any more questions or any questions. So
Don't think
nothing.
we've got any in the chat at the moment.
Okay, so what I will do then is let me just drop back into the PowerPoint slides, because so that's just a summary of the solution again. So we can share these with you, or well, you've got them as part of the recording as well. And then lastly, I'm just going to hand back to Madeline for the final slide.
Of course, thanks, Martin. I'll just cover this off and then we can see if there's any more questions. I've seen one come in into the chat. So just a quick summary. At the moment, Microsoft are looking at how this is presented pricing wise. So if anyone's interested in having some further conversations, we can kind of explore this and understand what it could look like for you and your organisations. But Martin, if you don't mind just going On to the next slide. I think it might just be a Q&A.
Yeah.
Placeholder. The only question we've got in at the moment is what part of the Microsoft Cloud for Sustainability solution do we see as the most valuable at the moment? I'll kind of go first. Just from listening to what Martin's talked through. So the thing that I found really interesting, there was kind of a little bit around sustainability by design, but the difficulty around those emissions, scope, and what is direct versus indirect. And I think something that I see as being really valuable is how we can see that environmental footprint in real time across emission sources, and that gives a really good platform to help challenge and tackle these, and then see the changes that are being made and being able to track it. And so that's probably the most valuable part I see in that.
Mhm.
Martin, I don't know if you want to add anything else to that kind of side of it.
Yeah, I mean, having spoken to some other organizations, I mean, the biggest challenge that they face is around it was exactly what you've just said, Madeline. It's around having that data in a consistent format so they can report on it, because you've got all your direct scope. So, those are the things that you can control and you can report on. But as organizations, we use so many other different channels. We use so many other different organizations as suppliers, because we purchase electricity, we purchase gas. But then also we've got things like, people going on flights, people driving cars, people heating their homes. Yeah, those are all indirect, but because they are associated with your organization, people working from home, for example, they're associated with your organization. That will all be a factor in your footprint. So it's indirect, but it is still a factor within your footprint. And it's how do we capture that information in a consistent format so that we can report on it, because the organizations that are ultimately responsible for that, the airline companies, the energy companies, they're all going to report in it or report on it in their own ways. But for you as an organization, for you as the university, how can you get that in a consistent format so that you can get accurate and centralized reporting and have a clearer picture about what your footprint is?
I don't think we've got any other questions coming in, and I'm just conscious of time. Do you mind just flipping to the next slide? Thank you. So I just wanted to put my details on the screen here. Thank you for everyone for joining. Hopefully you found it insightful. If you've got any questions after this, as I said in the chat, we'll send out a recording of the session so you can all, potentially go back, digest it a little bit more, share it internally. And if you've got any questions, please just reach out to me. Got my email address, but also my LinkedIn on here. So happy to connect with anyone. That would be really great, just to keep the conversation going. And just the final slide, please. Thank you. So we've just got two little QR codes. So if everyone can do this, if possible, before we all get back into all the meetings and calls of the days, these two QR codes are just, the first one is for a little bit of feedback. So what we're trying to do is just really build in these higher education hub communities. And if you've got anything else that you'd be really keen to see, please let us know, and pop it in this feedback survey. If you want a follow up and a proof of concept conversation with us, let us know on there too. And then the other QR code is our LinkedIn page. So we have a Crimson Higher Education LinkedIn page, which is where we share a lot of details from our blogs, but also other things that we're seeing happening across the industry. And there's a lot of content going on there at the moment, so it's always worth a good read and to connect with people across the industry too. So I think that is it from us today. So if there's no other questions, thanks everybody for joining. We'll fire out the recording, and I'm sure and I hope we'll speak to you all soon. Thanks
Thanks,
everybody.
everyone. Thank you.
Cheers, Martin.
Bye.